Introduction. On the evening of November 13, 2003, American Airlines Flight 75, a Boeing 757-200, departed from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport bound for Miami International Airport. The flight carried 201 passengers and 11 crew members, with Captain James Rowe and First Officer Michael Clarke in command. It was meant to be a routine transatlantic journey, but unexpected events turned the flight into a life-threatening emergency. A smooth takeoff. Flight 75 smoothly took off from Paris at 8:30 p.m. local time. The cabin crew carried out their duties efficiently, and passengers settled in for the long journey ahead. The initial hours of the flight were uneventful, with the aircraft cruising at 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Captain Rowe and First Officer Clarke occasionally monitored the instruments, while passengers dozed off or watched movies. Unexpected turbulence. 3 hours into the flight, turbulence struck unexpectedly. The aircraft jolted violently, waking passengers and alarming the crew. The turbulence grew worse, and the pilots struggled to stabilize the plane. Several oxygen masks dropped down in the cabin, and passengers began to panic as the turbulence became severe. Captain Rowe communicated with air traffic control, advising them of the turbulence and expressing concern over possible mechanical issues. System malfunctions. As the turbulence subsided, the crew noticed troubling signs. One of the engines started showing abnormal readings, while several other systems began malfunctioning, including the navigation instruments. Captain Rowe declared an emergency and requested immediate diversion to the nearest airport. The pilots manually adjusted the controls as they worked to resolve the issue, but the situation worsened when the flight lost communication with air traffic control due to electrical system failures. Sent into uncertainty. Without proper navigation and communication, the flight was forced to descend blindly, relying only on basic flight controls and visual reference from the limited light outside. As the plane descended through the dark clouds, Captain Rowe and First Officer Clarke were unsure if they were headed toward land or open ocean. They desperately searched for any sign of an airport or safe landing zone. Emergency landing. After what felt like an eternity, the pilots finally spotted a faint glow in the distance lights from an airport runway. With minimal control, Captain Rowe maneuvered the aircraft toward the runway. The landing gear was deployed manually as the plane made a shaky, emergency landing at Liège Air Base in the Azores, Portugal. The landing was rough, with sparks flying from the wheels as the plane skidded down the wet runway, but the crew managed to bring the aircraft to a stop. Aftermath and investigation. After the successful emergency landing, passengers and crew disembarked safely, though shaken. Investigators arrived to inspect the aircraft, uncovering that a combination of turbulence, electrical failures, and mechanical malfunctions had nearly caused a catastrophic accident. The crew was praised for their quick thinking and ability to land the plane despite such extreme conditions. The near disaster of American Airlines Flight 75 became a textbook example of how pilot skill and experience can save lives in the most dire circumstances. Investigations led to improved maintenance protocols and safety checks, ensuring that future flights could avoid similar situations. On November 13, 2003, American Airlines Flight 75, a Boeing 757-200, prepared for takeoff from Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, heading towards Miami International Airport. With 201 passengers and 11 crew members on board, the 9-hour journey was expected to be routine. Commanding the aircraft were Captain James Rowe, a 25-year veteran pilot with over 14,000 flight hours, and First Officer Michael Clarke, an experienced co-pilot known for his calm demeanor in high-stress situations. Flight 75 was expected to cruise smoothly over the Atlantic Ocean, with favorable weather forecasts for most of the route. However, hidden in the tranquil sky ahead, a deadly combination of technical failures and violent turbulence awaited the unsuspecting passengers and crew. Descends calm before the storm. The flight took off without issue at 8:30 p.m., climbing smoothly to a cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. In the cabin, flight attendants began serving meals while passengers settled in for the long journey. The engines hummed steadily, and the clear night outside hinted at a smooth crossing. The pilots checked their instruments and relaxed slightly after reaching cruising altitude. Captain Rowe leaned back, chatting with First Officer Clarke about their respective families, unaware that within hours they would be fighting for the survival of everyone on board. Image prompt for Scene 1: a peaceful nighttime scene of the Boeing 757-2000 cruising at high altitude over a calm ocean, with passengers in the dimly lit cabin watching movies, reading, or sleeping. The cockpit is shown with the pilots relaxed but alert, surrounded by the soft glow of the instrument panels. Approximately 3 hours into the flight, without warning, Flight 75 encountered sudden and severe turbulence over the mid-Atlantic. The aircraft jolted violently, waking passengers and throwing drinks and loose items around the cabin. The seatbelt sign flashed on as the plane was thrown from side to side. Captain Rowe immediately grabbed the controls, attempting to stabilize the aircraft. The turbulence worsened, and for nearly 10 minutes, the plane bucked wildly, falling and rising by hundreds of feet at a time. Passengers screamed as the aircraft shuddered. In the cockpit, the pilots struggled to maintain altitude and direction. The first signs of trouble emerged when the aircraft's autopilot disengaged, and the flight crew received a caution message indicating a problem with the hydraulic systems. Image prompt for Scene 2: a chaotic scene inside the cabin, with oxygen masks deployed and passengers gripping their seats as the plane is violently shaken by turbulence. Outside, dark storm clouds loom, adding to the sense of danger. In the cockpit, the pilots are shown focused and determined as they fight the controls. Critical failures unfold. As turbulence persisted, it became clear that this was not a typical storm. Alarms began blaring in the cockpit as multiple systems showed failures. The pilots noticed hydraulic fluid pressure dropping, leading to malfunctions in both primary and backup flight control systems. Captain Rowe and First Officer Clarke quickly switched to manual controls, struggling to keep the plane level. The loss of hydraulic pressure impacted the aircraft's ability to control flaps, ailerons, and other critical systems. The turbulence also caused damage to the electrical systems, which resulted in multiple communication failures. The plane was no longer able to communicate reliably with air traffic control, and the pilots were essentially flying blind. Captain Rowe declared an emergency, attempting to divert to the nearest airport. However, the situation worsened when they realized that the navigation system had failed, leaving them disoriented over the vast Atlantic. First Officer Clarke manually calculated their location and estimated they were still hours away from the nearest landmass. Image prompt for Scene 3: a tense and dimly lit cockpit filled with alarms and flashing warning lights. Captain Rowe and First Officer Clarke are shown working furiously at the controls, with the instrument panels showing hydraulic failure and electrical system warnings. The external view shows the plane engulfed in thick, stormy clouds. A blind descent. With no communication or reliable navigation, the crew faced an almost impossible challenge. The aircraft's hydraulic failures made it increasingly difficult to maintain control, and the plane began to descend. As they fought to regain altitude, the pilots were uncertain whether they were descending toward the ocean or land. Captain Rowe, relying on his decades of experience, began guiding the plane through sheer instinct and visual cues from the lightning-illuminated sky. They descended into dark storm clouds, with both pilots scanning for any sign of land or lights below. Fuel levels were dropping, adding even more urgency to the situation. In the cabin, passengers prayed and comforted each other, unsure if they were headed towards safety or disaster. The flight attendants, though terrified themselves, tried to maintain calm as the aircraft lurched downwards. Image prompt for Scene 4: the Boeing 757-200 descends rapidly through swirling storm clouds, with flashes of lightning illuminating the scene. Inside the cabin, passengers are shown gripping each other's hands and praying. The cockpit view captures the tense faces of the pilots, peering out into the dark, stormy sky in search of land. Miracle landing at Lajes Air Base. Suddenly, a miracle through a break in the clouds. Captain Rowe spotted a faint glow of runway lights in the distance. It was Lajes Air Base, a small military installation on the island of Terceira in the Azores. With no functional hydraulic systems, the plane was flying on partial controls. But Captain Rowe prepared for the emergency landing of his career. The landing gear was manually lowered, but without full hydraulic pressure, it didn't lock into place properly. With sparks flying, Flight 75 touched down on the runway, skidding violently across the wet tarmac. The aircraft's brakes were only partially functional, but the pilots managed to bring the aircraft to a halt, narrowly avoiding a crash. Emergency vehicles rushed to the scene as the aircraft came to a shaky stop. Remarkably, despite the terrifying conditions, there were no serious injuries among the passengers or crew. Image prompt for Scene 5: a dramatic night scene of the Boeing 757-200 making a rough emergency landing on the wet runway of Lajes Air Base. Sparks fly from the landing gear as it skids along the ground. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights rush toward the aircraft, with rain pouring down and dark storm clouds overhead. Aftermath and heroism. In the aftermath, passengers and crew were evacuated quickly, and many hugged each other in relief. The pilots, though exhausted, were hailed as heroes for their calmness and skill under extreme pressure. Aviation investigators arrived to inspect the damaged aircraft, revealing that the combination of severe turbulence, hydraulic failure, and electrical malfunctions could have easily led to a disaster. Captain Rowe and First Officer Clarke's actions became a symbol of aviation professionalism. The incident sparked significant changes in hydraulic system designs and maintenance protocols across the industry. Flight 75 became a case study in crisis management, teaching future pilots how to handle multiple system failures at once. Image prompt for Scene 6: passengers and crew safely evacuated, with Captain Rowe and First Officer Clarke standing outside the aircraft, receiving praise from emergency responders. In the background, the damaged Boeing 757 is lit by floodlights as investigators examine the scene. Legacy of Flight 75. American Airlines Flight 75 became a symbol of how critical training, experience, and quick decision-making can save lives, even in the most extreme circumstances. While the passengers and crew were left with a harrowing memory, the incident highlighted the importance of resilience and innovation in aviation and aviation safety.